Good morning. Day 6,146 of the Nichols hostage crisis, 24 days less with students. Today I'm going to do part 2 of paddling. A lot of people, corporal punishment is a very controversial thing. I realize that, but it wasn't very controversial back in the 70s when I was in elementary school. Like I said, I had a few paddlings for my indiscretions, but when I got to 6th grade, I had my first man teacher in 6th grade. And I'm going to call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith had quite a reputation for paddling, and there were a lot of rumors about Mr. Smith and his paddle, whether or not it had electric tape on the end of it, or whether or not it had holes in it, or whether or not it had nails in it. There were all kind of rumors about his paddle, but he was renowned for that paddle. And so we all got put into his class in 6th grade, and we already were concerned, with these rumors. So the very first day of school, we had a kid named Jim, and Jim had been in my class since 1st grade, and Jim had been in trouble. Every teacher had trouble with Jim. Everybody. He always was saying stuff back to the teacher. He always was, pitching fits. He always was arguing. It was just constant. And so, the teacher would do everything they could do. They'd paddle him, they'd send him to the principal's office and all this stuff. And then when he was gone, we didn't have all the privacy laws like we got now. And they'd be like, now, y'all know how Jim is. Y'all know Jim wants to try to get y'all to laugh. And Jim, likes to cut up. And Jim, and when y'all laugh at Jim, all that does is encourage him. And he's down there right now getting a paddling. And if y'all keep laughing and paying attention to him, he's going to get even worse. And they'd try to explain all this stuff to us. Well, anyway, 6th grade. In Mr. Smith's class, about the first or second day, Jim just did what he always did, what he had learned for 5 years and how to act in school. And Mr. Smith took him out in the hallway, and we were dead silent. When that guy, we didn't ever even talk in his class. We were scared to death. And so anyway, he took Jim out, and it was dead silent. Nobody talked. And Jim came back in, and Jim was just a shell of himself. He was crying and all this stuff. Of course, Jim, he was emotional. But anyway, Jim came back, and it was like a miracle cure. Jim no longer interrupted class. Jim no longer said anything back to the teacher. He kept his mouth shut. Mr. Smith taught Jim a new way to act. And then about 2 weeks later, there was another kid. He was about 6'2". I'll call him Sam. And Sam said something back to Mr. Smith. And I mean, it wasn't much, because nobody said much back to Mr. Smith. And he took him out in the hall, and he came back, and he was crying. And I will say, it's not like it is now. Back then, boys, it was drilled into us, boys do not cry. You don't cry. You don't cry in front of other people. You don't cry, you just didn't do it. Men don't cry. And so he came back crying, and he was crying in front of everybody, and he didn't care that he was crying in front of everybody. He could care that he was crying. And so I determined right then, Mr. Smith is not going to make me cry in front of all these other students. I am going to act right. And I just remember it being dead silent in his room the whole first semester. And second semester, we got to talk a little bit. You got a little looser. But anyway, we learned how to act in Mr. Smith's room. And I don't know how much we learned. Education-wise, we probably learned a lot, because Jim wasn't interrupting class anymore, and we could all pay attention and didn't have to listen to him act up. So we probably learned a lot. But anyway, that's the second part of paddling, is how I learned to act in 6th grade.